Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. My name is Gabby. I work for a Uni Connect called Study Hire, and I have my colleagues here, Sam and Colleen, who are a Uni Connect partnership, but with Aspire Hire. And between us, we have organised a number of webinars to support teachers and advisors with various informations. I'm sure you might have seen the flyer. If not, don't be surprised if it comes out after this session and for the next couple of weeks. But today we're going to be talking about the Student Finance, and we have Stacey May Fox here from Student Finance England. I got that right? Yes. Who's going to be delivering the presentation, and hopefully if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll probably get around to asking them maybe at the end, but we'll see how we get on throughout the presentation. Over to you, Stacey. Thanks very much.
Wonderful, thank you, Gabby. So yeah, firstly, thank you everybody for finding the time in your diary today to attend our Student Finance talk. As mentioned, my name is Stacey May Fox and I work for the Student Loans Company. I'm just going to get my screen ready to share. But effectively, I am part of the Funding Information Services team. So you will have an account manager specifically for your individual region. I generally tend to cover the southwest of England and South Wales. But effectively, we're here to hopefully meet all your student finance training needs. As well as answer sort of any complex queries you may have, and just really support you with student finance in general. So with that being said, we will get started. And just to preempt that the information that I am providing today is looking at Student Finance England, and it is the information for the upcoming academic year, which is of course 23-24. So just to start off, just give you a little bit of an overview of sort of Student Finance England in general. So as you are likely know, Student Finance England are here to provide financial support on behalf of the UK government to eligible students from England who are looking to enter higher education in the UK. So again, I'm sure you're familiar with sort of the two core products, if you will. So the two main costs that students have whilst they're studying are, of course, tuition fee and their maintenance loans, so their living cost amount. The amount that students will receive will depend on their course, where they're living whilst they're studying, and also their household income. So as mentioned, this information is for the upcoming academic year. So I believe that officially starts on the 1st of August 2023. So we're just going to start with some general eligibility. So in order to be eligible for financial support from SFE, students do need to meet sort of certain residency criteria. The easiest way to think of this is that the student has settled status. So what that means is that the student can live in the UK without any Home Office restrictions. As well as having settled status, they also need to be resident in England on the first day of the first academic year of their course and had been living in England or the UK in general. For SFE, it must be England for the 3 years immediately prior to this date, so prior to that first day of the first academic year of their course. That's not to say that obviously sort of non-UK nationals are not eligible for student finance, in particular those that are EU, EEA or Swiss nationals. I'm sure Amar's already gone through a lot of this information sort of after Brexit when we started looking at the EU settlement scheme, but ultimately the government introduced what we call the EUSS, which is the EU settled scheme, and what that means is that sort of our EU, EEA and Swiss national students will effectively go through this sort of process and be given one of two statuses. We have the settled status and the pre-settled status. Dependent on what status they have, ultimately translates into what funding they will receive. So if we have students with EU settled status, they are eligible for both tuition fee and maintenance support. However, in those who have pre-settled status would only be eligible for tuition fee support. So aside from EU SS schemes, we also have support available for certain sort of protected categories. So people with residency statuses such as refugee, humanitarian protection, stateless person will also be eligible for student finance. Most recently, I'm sure everybody is familiar with the situation in Ukraine. So the government did actually turn around very quickly last year and introduced the 3 sort of Ukrainian schemes, and ultimately students that have one of these 3 schemes are also eligible for student finance. So there are a real host of categories around residency. So if you would like more information, I have included a link at the bottom of that slide, which will take you to gov.uk and just provide more information from sort of different nationalities and eligibility. Okay, so now I'm keen to talk to you about sort of core support, so exactly what is available. So I'm sure we are all familiar with tuition fee support. The great news is that this is, I believe, now the 6th year in succession that tuition fees have been frozen. So if you're familiar with student finance already, when it comes to tuition fees, nothing has changed. So ultimately, the maximum tuition fee that a standard full-time university with an approved or fee cap provider with that access and participation plan and TEF award, the maximum amount that you can charge is still going to be £9,250. When it comes to the full-time accelerated degrees, the maximum has still been capped at 11,100. For part-time courses, the maximum is going to remain at £6,935. So again, similar sort of process. Obviously, tuition fee loans are paid once a year, and they are paid directly to the university, not to the student themselves. But ultimately, there's been no real change with tuition fee. So maintenance, however, which is probably the one that your students are most interested in talking to you about, has changed slightly. So again, maintenance loan is ultimately there to support students with their living costs whilst they are in higher education. All students who are eligible are entitled to get some type of maintenance support. As I mentioned at the beginning of this slide deck, the actual amount that a student will receive will depend on their household income and where they are living and studying. Maintenance loan, again, slightly different to tuition fee in the sense that it's paid directly to the student. The student is told how much they are going to be entitled to for that academic year. That's then split into 3 payments and generally paid at the start of term. Obviously, tuition fees and maintenance support are both loans, so they do need to be repaid, but we'll talk about sort of repayment later on in the slide deck. So just to give you an indicator of the maximum amounts that are available for the upcoming academic year. Again, I know that there are some attendees today that are fairly new to student finance. So for those that may be old hats when it comes to FFE, my apologies if I'm duplicating information that you already know. But for those of you who are new, I just want to sort of run through this in a little bit more detail. So when it comes to maintenance support, we have sort of the 4 main categories, if you will. So we have the home rates, which does pretty much what it says on the tin. So that is for students who are residing at the parental home whilst they are attending university. We then have the elsewhere rate. So that is for students who are studying away from the parental home elsewhere. We also have the London rate, so that is for students who are studying away from home but in London, and we also have the overseas rate. So this rate is for students who are studying abroad as part of their UK course. So, oh, sorry, I think somebody's off mute. Thank you. So for those who are on the home rate, the maximum amount of support that's available is £8,400. For those who are elsewhere, the maximum available is 9,978. For those who are elsewhere but studying inside of London, the maximum is £13,022. And for those studying overseas as part of their UK course, the maximum available is £11,427. Aside from that, we do also have sort of a different maintenance loan rates for students who are currently in receipt of benefits. So if students are entitled to benefit, they are receiving benefits, they might be on universal credit, and then ultimately they have a slightly higher maximum. So I am conscious that a lot of the people that you talk to are very likely going to be school or college leavers. So I'm not going to run into the entitled to benefits or aged over 60 into too much detail, as I can't imagine it's going to be particularly prevalent to them. But if you do have any sort of more mature students who ask questions, then at least you've got that information to refer back to. So we have just discussed these sort of four main categories and what the maximum amount is for each of those categories. The next part of this is the household income assessment. So we've got the three main categories at the top of this table. We've got the home rate, the elsewhere rate and the London rate. So once it's determined which category the student sits in, if they're home, elsewhere or London, the exact amount that they will get, as I've mentioned, depends on their household income. So if we look at a household income of £25,000 and under, in that instance, the student would receive the maximum amount of entitlement available, which are those figures that we've run through, the 84, the 9978 and the 13022. Now, you will notice that as the household income increases, the amount of maintenance support available to the student will decrease. So again, I'm not going to bore you by running through every single line here, but if we just use an example of 40,000, if that household income is 40,000, the student is residing elsewhere, so they've gone away to halls, then ultimately the maximum amount that the student will get, or the amount the student will get, is 7,839. You will then notice sort of the red, if you will, at the bottom shows where this tends to cap. So for those students who are residing at the home, once the household income is £60,000 or more, the amount that they'll get in maintenance will not change. They will receive what we call the non-means tested amount, which is £3,698. For the elsewhere rate, that is slightly higher in the sense that household income caps at £65,000. So once household income again is £65,000 or more, it's not going to make any difference of how much more. The student is only going to receive £4,651. And again, increases for London, where you'll notice that the household income caps at £70,022. And in that instance, anything sort of there or over, the student would receive £6,485. So I've spoke to you about sort of how maintenance is awarded based on household income, but one question that we do tend to get a lot is, well, who is part of the household, whose income needs to be counted? So for that, I have this table. Judging by the conversations that I had with sort of Gabby at the beginning and Colleen, I'm assuming that a lot of the people that you're going to be speaking to are aged under 25. So in that instance, if the student is single, or even if they are living with their partner, because they are under 25, it's actually their parents' household income that we will ask for. The only instance where we will go to the partner or the spouse is if the student is actually married. There is another sort of instance where a student may be classed as independent. So this can be for a variety of reasons. They can either be a care leaver, they may be estranged from their parents, or potentially they may just be financially independent. They may have moved out at sort of 16 and have managed to be financially independent for the last couple of years and don't want to be assessed based on their parents' income. So essentially, if they are deemed as independent by us, then we won't ask for anybody's household income. Independent students automatically receive the maximum amount of maintenance available. Okay. So that is a little bit of background about whose household income we ask for. Now, we are very aware that sort of a traditional household setup is very different, perhaps, than it may have been sort of 50 years ago. So I just want to give a little bit more information around that. So if student lives with mum and dad, then ultimately it's mum and dad's income that we look at for the household income assessment. If mum and dad are no longer together and reside at different properties, if student lives with dad, it's dad's income. If student lives with mum, it's mum's income. However, if student lives with dad and dad has a new partner who resides with dad at that property, then it is going to be dad and new partner's income that we look at. Similarly with mum, if mum gets a new partner and the partner resides in the home with her, then it's mum and partner's information that we will ask. Okay, and then as mentioned, if the student's deemed as independent, then ultimately it's nobody's income. So there are instances where a parent has come up to me at an event and said, well, my wife and I are sort of no longer together, we share custody, and generally it's a 50-50 split, who will sort of have the child. In that instance, there's no sort of rule of thumb. From an SFE perspective, we always say the parent that you spend the most time with. But if there is a genuine 50-50 split, then ultimately it's up to the student to determine whose details they declare. So that is whose income we ask for household income. Next question I get asked is, what is counted as household income? So the easiest way to explain that is anything that is taxable. So I've given you some examples in these little tables. So obviously things like taxable income, as you would expect. So earnings from employment, earnings from self-employment, but there's also things like rent if they're letting property. Benefits as well potentially can be taxable. So things like job seekers allowance or care allowance are considered taxable benefits. So if a parent is in receipt of job seekers or a care allowance, they would need to declare those details when doing the sponsor and sort of financial evidence information. So one thing I would like to highlight as well is when we ask for household income, it is generally I think the way we phrase it is the last complete tax year that we ask for. So for example, if a student is going to apply in May of this year, it's generally April 2022 that we would ask for that information. However, if the parent or the household situation is very different, so for example, if mum and dad have both decided to go part-time since the last complete tax year, and therefore they've seen a vast reduction in sort of the income that's coming into the house, they can actually ask to do something called a current year income assessment. So there has to have been a reduction in the entire household income by at least 15%. But a current year income assessment essentially means that we will say to mum and dad, what is your estimated income for this year? And then we will then award the student their maintenance provided on those estimates, rather than, like I say, using previous information that actually is very different. So if, for example, mum and dad previously were on sort of £70,000, student was only able to get, say, £5,000 in maintenance support. If they're now earning £30,000 per year, they're not going to have that additional supplementary income to help their child through university. So therefore, if they give us their estimates based on the 30k that they're expecting to be on, it just means that actually we'll be able to provide the student with more maintenance support. So again, just want to highlight that with you. There is a link. I will make sure that these slides are sent across and can be cascaded, but there is a link on the Find Out More in blue, which will take you through to gov.uk current year income assessment guide. as a tool or a resource for you guys. If you do talk to students or talking to parents, there's actually a step-by-step guide to applying and also to supporting an application available on gov.uk. So again, I have included a link in there. So I have already touched on sort of what independent student status is, but just so that you've got something to refer to, these are the categories. So normally a student would be aged over 25, and in which case they are now independent. If they are under 25 and either have care of a person under the age of 18, if they've supported themselves financially for 3 years before the start of the course, if they've had no contact or estranged from their parents, or are a care leaver, then ultimately they are going to be classed as an independent student. There is a couple of sort of the charity links on there, such as Standalone and Propel. So if you are engaging with care leavers or estranged students, it's certainly worth ensuring that they have access to both Propel and Standalone. They genuinely are really good sort of organisations that are there to support sort of care leavers or estranged students specifically. So a real host of resources available. There's also a guide on UCAS around sort of independent students from student finance perspective. So again, that link is included. So that is the bread and butter, if you will, of student finance as far as tuition fee and maintenance loan support goes. However, that's not necessarily the end of the funding pot. There is potentially additional financial support available. So we have what we call the Disabled Students Allowance, which is for students who have a disability, a long-term health condition, a mental health condition, or a specific learning difficulty. For students who have their own children or who may have an adult who is financially dependent on them, we also have what we call the Grants for Dependents range. So there's 3 products available there. The childcare grant, there's also a parental learning allowance, and there's also an adult dependence grant. More information again can be found on that on gov.uk, or if you guys want to discuss that further, certainly reach out to your local SLC FIS account manager, and we'd be more than happy to give you a more detailed session. There's also additional funding available for any students who are studying an eligible nursing, midwifery or allied health professional course, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that is actually a product that is offered by the NHS Bursary Support Award rather than student finance, but just to let you know that that funding is there. What we also encourage students to look at is the bursaries and scholarships, which may be available to them. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Scholarship Hub, but there are some really weird and wonderful scholarships and bursaries available. I actually believe there's one called the Graham Bursary. So if your name's Graham, you can get an extra £2,000. There's also, I believe, a vegan bursary. So if you were vegan, there's potentially like an extra 500, an extra £1,000 available. So what I'm trying to stress at is there are some really sort of weird and wonderful, unique ways to secure extra funding that may not be the atypical scholarships and bursaries that students think of, which are sort of high achieving academics or sort of sport prowess. So it's definitely worth encouraging students to research and see if there's anything sort of additional that they can perhaps apply for. So I've mentioned Disabled Students Allowance. So we have had a slight uplift compared to last year. So you'll see the table in green, but effectively there's up to £26,291 per year available for a student to use for their Disabled Students Allowance. I've already sort of indicated what that can be used for. Mental health is one that we've really been pushing over the last few years. I think sort of atypically people who may suffer from depression, anxiety wouldn't necessarily declare themselves as needing Disabled Students Allowance. But to give you an example, I think one sort of scenario we had where a student had really struggled with social anxiety. They applied for DSA, they were awarded it, and ultimately recently they had their transportation to a taxi effectively to and from university campus, so that they didn't have to use public transportation. So certainly, again, worth ensuring that students know the spectrum that it covers, and if they believe that they fall within that, to certainly apply and apply on time. Disabled students allowance application the application itself is pretty simple, but they have to supply evidence. There's quite a lengthy process to go through, which includes meeting with a needs assessor just to discuss, I don't know, have you thought about getting a fridge for your medication? So the needs assessor are obviously sort of niche specialists in that area. There may be things that the student hasn't thought of that would actually benefit them and help them with their time at university that a needs assessor may suggest to them. So because of the various stages, I think on average we advise it can take sort of between 90 and 100 days to actually get through the entirety of the DSA application. So if you have students that want to apply for DSA, please do encourage early applications to ensure that they've got everything in place for when they start university. So NHS, as I've mentioned, this actually isn't a SFE product. This is an NHS one, but it makes sense that I make you aware. So from academic year 20 and 21, any new and continuing UK domiciled nursing, midwifery and many other allied health students who are undertaking pre-registration courses at English universities, this is the key, English universities, will receive a £5,000 training grant. So like DSA, it is a grant, which means it doesn't need to be repaid. So every student that is studying, or every eligible student that is studying one of those courses in that top table at an English university will receive £5,000 in the form of a grant every year. Aside from that £5,000, there may potentially be more money in the pot available. So if the student has children, they can get up to an extra £2,000 towards childcare costs. If they're a new student who is studying what we deem as a shorted specialism, so you'll see that you may be able to just make out that little box in the bottom left, but things like mental health nursing, learning disability nursing, prosthetics and orthotics have been deemed by the government as a specialist subject, and as such those students will attract an extra £1,000 grant funding if they are studying one of those. Again, if you would like more information around the NHS Learning Support Fund, they do have a communications toolkit. You can see an example of what the resources look like on the right, and there is a link on the bottom of that page which will take you directly through to the NHS site. So that is the funding that's available. Next, we'll just jump on to sort of key messages and myth debusting. So just to give you an indicator, in 2021, we only actually had 69% of our full-time students actually applying before the deadline. I think it even dropped last year, and last year the national average is looking round about 67%. So the difficulty that we have with that is students who do not apply before deadline, which for new students is round about mid to the end of May. It's not to say that they can't apply after the deadline. There's just going to be no guarantee that those funds, that application is going to be processed and those funds are going to be available when they start university. So apply on time is a key message. One of the big things that students tend to get confused about is they think that they must have a confirmed place at university in order to apply. That is a myth. Ultimately, the student can submit their application with their current preferred choice. That then allows our sort of assessment teams and our processing centres to actually go through the financial evidence and do all sort of the eligibility checks and things like that, and ultimately get that status ready to award. If for any reason the student changes their mind and decides actually they're going to go through clearing in August, and suddenly those details are different, it is a 5-minute job effectively for us to change that and then run the assessment again. However, if a student applies fresh in August, we have to do all of that sort of evidence, which is lengthy, and as such, as I mentioned, the student is unlikely to have those funds in place. As with any sort of financial application, just making sure that the information they provide and evidence that they give us is right first time, and that students are reading, understanding and agreeing to the loan terms and conditions. The best way for students to apply is online on gov.uk, and just to make you aware that applications are now open, so students are able to apply. Before starting an application, it's really useful if students have the information that they're going to need. So UK passports, if student doesn't have their passport, their birth certificate would now be accepted. We have joined the digital age, as you may have noticed, and we can now actually accept all this information via digital upload, rather than the student having to send it in the post to Darlington and praying that they get their passport back before, I don't know, a trip to Ibiza at the weekend. As mentioned, they also need to provide a university and course details. However, they can change those details later, so just have their preferred choice to submit their application. We also need to have the student's UK bank account details, so just make sure that they have their own accounts and they've got those details to hand, and also their national insurance number, as ultimately repayments are linked to NI. So if we do not have an NI number, we will not pay the student those funds. For parents and sponsors, they just need to ensure that they've got their NI numbers and their income information. And again, if they have any other child dependents, just need to sort of make us aware of that in case the children are both at university at the same time. Okay, so I've mentioned already that we have joined the digital age, but we're actually getting even better. So we have actually updated what we call the customer engagement management portal. So that's basically the portal that the students see. So I personally liken this development to almost like a Deliveroo type app or a Domino's pizza app. So now when students actually submit their application, they will be able to see the status. So they will know that that is with an assessor, and they will know that that's now been approved. If there's any additional evidence or information that we need, they will get a notification through their portal as well. So ultimately, we've just had quite a lot of enhancements over the last sort of 8 months, which should improve the user experience and really give the student more visibility of what's going on with their loan and more autonomy to make changes. Okay. So I have already mentioned that student finance is open. There are some campaigns available for both SFE and SFW. So if you guys want to have a look at any of the resources that we may have that you may find useful, you can look on either SFE or SFW. But again, I would also suggest that you reach out to your FIS regional account manager, which I think Amar potentially for the majority of you, or Charmaine for Reading, but do reach out, because as a team we've actually created a lot of our own sort of leaflets and handouts, which unfortunately we're not able to host on the website, so we would need to send those to you on an ad hoc basis. Okay. So I've already mentioned that gov.uk had the step-by-step to applying guide, and that there was also the guide for sponsors. Obviously, living costs is a major point of contention at the moment, and I'm sure we all know that ourselves. But the government have actually created a new sort of web page on gov.uk, where they're trying to give lots of sort of information and advice on understanding living costs. So again, I have included that link in there. Have already touched on the sponsor guidance. So again, there is more information around sort of what evidence and things like that, but more of a sort of in-depth overview for parents and sponsors. So again, feel free to use that link for parents' evenings potentially. There's also an evidence guide for students and their parents and partners, and there is a short film available as well. So again, I have included that link. So I just want to talk to you about repayments, because we have actually had a bit of a change. So bear with me one moment. Let me just... So that information that we've just gone past is regarding our Plan 2 loans. So basically, Plan 2 is the loan system which was in place for students from, I believe, 2016 or potentially prior up until last year. So if you have students who are continuing students, so the upcoming September, they're entering year 2, they've already got a loan, they're going to remain on Plan 2. However, new students who are starting this upcoming academic year are going to be on a new plan, which we call Plan 5. So there are some slight differences. So when it comes to repayments, the main things to be aware of or let students know is that they will not start making repayments until the April following completion or withdrawal of their course. So if, for example, your students are starting in 2023 September, they're going to graduate in, I don't know, say June 2026. It's not going to be until April 2027 that they officially enter what we call the repayment period. However, they may still not make repayments because they will not need to make a repayment until they earn over the threshold, which is set currently at £25,000. The government have already confirmed that they are freezing that £25,000 threshold until 2026. So ultimately, it normally increases in line with the sort of living wage increase. So there will be a slight uplift, we expect, in 2027, which will maybe take it around about £25,500. But obviously, that's just an assumption. It's quite a few years off, and I can't confirm what the government are going to announce, but that's sort of a realistic expectation. So as I've mentioned, we have this new threshold, which is £25,000. Students will only repay 9% on what they earn above 25,000. So they won't pay 9% on 25k and under. It's just anything above that threshold. There has also been a slight change to the write-off period. So for your new students starting in 23-24, once they enter that official repayment date in April 2027, it's actually going to be 40 years from that point. If they have an outstanding balance, then that balance will be written off. Regardless of how much is there, that will be written off. So there has been one more change with the sort of repayment plans interest. So Plan 2, as I've already explained, is sort of the old plan, if you will. So previously, interest was calculated on loans almost on a tiered approach. So you'll see that during study until a student entered repayment, the interest that they would pay is what we call the retail price index, so the RPI, plus 3%. I think sort of when these slides were created last year, the RPI was set at 2.6%. So with the 2.6 plus the 3%, they were paying effectively 5.6% in interest during that period of study until they entered that repayment date. Once they entered that repayment date, if they were earning below the threshold, as it is for Plan 2, which is 27,295, not 25 like this new one, but if they were earning under threshold, it was RPI that they were paying in interest, which was 2.6%. If they were earning between 27,295 to 49,130, it was RPI plus up to 3%, and anything over that 49,130, again, it was RPI plus 3%. So you can see from that sort of yellow circle, on average, it was around about sort of 5.6% that students were paying in interest. So for the new plan, Plan 5, that your new students will be starting in academic year 23-24, interest is no longer going to be tiered. It's going to remain the same regardless of where the student is in their journey, and it's going to be set at RPI plus 0%. So obviously, in a nutshell, it effectively means that students on this new plan are going to be accumulating far less interest than students that were on Plan 2. So yeah, good news story. So obviously I know that we can explain that to students, but generally they're going to want to know, well, that's great, but exactly how much am I going to be paying a month? So here's some approximations. I've mentioned that at the moment the government has confirmed that the 25k is going to be fixed until sort of the certain periods. I think till 2026, 2027, we're expecting it to raise in line with living wage increase. This is an approximation because, as I've said, we don't know what that living wage increase is going to be like in 2027. But just to give students an indicator, bearing in mind sort of other years that we've looked at, we're estimating that the threshold will likely go up to around about 25,710. So for that reason, you've got a student who is now a graduate, they are working, they are earning an income. If that student is earning £30,000 per year, then they can expect in 2027 that they will make a monthly payment of £32 towards their student loan. Again, you will see that as the annual income increases, the amount that they will repay will also increase, and that is purely down to the fact that it's a fixed 9% on anything earned above that threshold. Okay. So there's lots of information available around this reform and sort of why the government have decided to do it and sort of the justification on sort of the lower interest rate. So if you would like to have a look at that, you can either go to the link on gov.uk or the Education Hub, where there's also a blog. We also have various social media centres. So we actually have a designated repayment page on Twitter. So I will give you the handle in a moment, but there are actually advisors that are there available to answer student questions. So if you do get any queries, students are more than welcome to tweet SLC repayment and answer their queries there. We are also on Facebook. So again, the handle has been included. For you guys, I know that we've spoken about a lot of the resources that are available, already mentioned sort of the evidence guide, the sponsor guide. There's also a how you're assessed and paid, and also sort of an overview of our terms and conditions. Again, all available on gov.uk with those links included. We also have designated SFE pages on Student Room and UCAS. So again, included those handles at the bottom or those links just for your own convenience. With budgeting, there's again a host of resources available, unfortunately not generally by us specifically, because we are certainly not financial advisors. But things like Save the Student, Discover Uni, Martin Lewis as well. I believe Martin Lewis actually has an Excel spreadsheet, which is a student sort of budgeting spreadsheet that's available to download. And again, I have included all of those links on there. So there are actually some really interesting resources on a lot of these. So maybe if you get 10 minutes downtime with a cup of coffee, it might be worth having a look through. But to sort of end the session, there's ultimately sort of the 3 key points that I'd like to leave you with in order for you to sort of reiterate to your students. It's really, research is obviously really important, that students are researching all of the support that's available to them, making the right university or college choice, and then applying, as I've hopefully emphasised quite a lot, applying online and on time, not needing to wait for those confirmed offers, and with repayments, that students don't actually pay until they earn over a certain threshold, and the amount that they repay is based on what they earn and not what they owe. So that is the end of our student finance session today. Like I say, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to try and answer those.
Thank you so much. Loads of information there. If you do have any questions, feel free to unmic. If you are comfortable, you can obviously take your camera off as well. The floor is open.
Gabby, we do just have one that, sorry, I'll just put my camera on so everyone knows it's me talking. Something that was asked in the chat earlier. I think, Stacey May, you covered the fact of whether it was based on both parental incomes, but there was a sort of secondary element. Is the income based before or after tax?
I mean, ultimately, I'm going to believe your before, because it's your financial income ultimately, not sort of your take-home pay.
Yeah, perfect. I'm just scanning to make sure. I think that was it in terms of questions in the chat. But obviously, if anyone would like to ask anything further, oh, someone else is just typing, so we'll just give them a minute.
I'm just thinking it might be worth, after the session, if I send you over one of the sort of account manager maps, which you can then cascade, just so that everybody knows who to get in touch with if they want additional sessions, or if they want to see the resources that we have available. Not just sort of leaflets and posters. We try to keep them quite specific as well. So we have things specifically for refugees, for long residency care leavers. But we also have a bank of plasma slides, so they can be used on iPads or television screens, and they've got like little QR codes so that students can hopefully walk past and follow the link. So yeah, definitely worth getting in touch with your account manager for that.
That'll be really helpful. Thank you, Stacey. Much appreciated. There's just a few people that have had to leave because they've got other appointments. But for those that are left, if you've got any additional questions, feel free to ask them now. I had a question while I was thinking, like, with the application for just obviously to apply for a loan, like how long is that process? You know, like from the moment they,
to be honest, there's no set sort of thing. I mean, I actually had an example. I think it was it yesterday? Where did I go yesterday? I think it was last week. I did an event and somebody said that their kid had done an application and had confirmation within a week that their student finance had been done. So it really depends on how accurate the information is when they upload. If it's I don't want to say the easy information, but things like your UK passport, we actually use the check with Her Majesty's Passport Office. So it's not like a case that we have to go through all the checks like you might have done a few years ago. It's a case of Her Majesty's Passport Office, is this real? Do you know this number? Perfect. And then a tick box and moving on to the next. So it can be really quick. And obviously at the moment, applications haven't long opened, so there isn't a wait. There's lots of assessors twiddling their fingers, eagerly anticipating a rush. Whereas potentially if you apply in August, like I say, with hundreds of thousands of other students that are waiting for clearing, then you could find that will take extensively longer.
Yeah. And is there like a time when like it's a bit too late to apply? You know, like
not
I know
really, like years later, but it's not totally out of the realm of possibility where I've had a practitioner come to me and say, oh, my student didn't receive their student finance 2 years ago. We're still waiting on tuition fee, and then me to sort of try and backtrack that. So certainly wouldn't encourage that, but it's not something that I've not experienced. So what I would say is that obviously, as I've mentioned, sort of really, I'd say July and August can be quite intense because we get a lot of the sort of, oh crikey, I better hurry up and submit my student finance. I think December is also a particularly busy time. For our migrant workers, we have to request evidence of their employment. So that's lots of pay slips and things like that then get sent to us around about December time. And also we've got the January cohort. So you may find that we're particularly busy around Christmas. So yeah, really, like I say, sort of the main message: new students apply by mid-May, continuing students apply by the end of May. That's for full-time undergrads. And yeah, anyone else that's a bit later, don't worry too much, but just get that application in ASAP.
Brilliant, thank you. And we just had one more question about the account managers and if they can go into schools and deliver presentations.
Fortunately not. We are a practitioner facing team. normally with school presentations, we would expect sort of your local college or universities to provide that service. There's also an organisation called Halloa. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Halloa, but part of their role is that they are supposed to ultimately provide student finance updates at schools and colleges. So I would certainly, in the first instance, perhaps reach out to sort of the local college or university to see if they have members of staff that do that. I mean, one of my local universities actually has a school engagement team, and they travel all over the country, well, at least within their catchment area, and deliver sort of student finance talks. So I am more than happy. I offer a training session called Train the Presenter. So it's more around sort of how to deliver all this complex information to school children in a way that they'd understand. So that's something I'm always willing to offer to universities or colleges.
Yeah.
You mentioned EU students on a slide. Now that we're longer EU, if a student has resided in the EU for 3 years but not UK for 3 years, are they entitled to home fees? Not longer in the infusion has resided in the EU. So basically, with the EU settlement scheme, they had to have been in the country before the 31st of December in the Brexit year. I've totally forgot what year it is now, but I will dig it out. Just all seems like a blur with COVID. It's like literally, I don't know which way's up and which way's down from 2 years ago. But if they were in the country before that 31st of December date, they were eligible to apply for the EU settlement scheme. The EU settlement scheme, I believe, closed the 30th of June that year. However, if the student had a family member who was residing in the UK prior to that settlement date of the 31st of December, they can almost piggyback on their family member's visa. So effectively, if you've got a student now who is an EU citizen, has been residing in the EU, and they're only just planning on moving to the UK in August to start a course in September, they would not be eligible for the EU settlement scheme. So they would need to ultimately have conversations with the sort of immigration office as to what visa they would be able to get. So with the 3-year thing, EU settlement scheme, they just had to be here before the end of that date and be residing either in the EU or in the UK. It was all sort of synonymous, as long as they were in one within that 3-year period and had been in the UK before the 31st of December. It was those students who were eligible to apply on the EU settlement scheme.
Thank you.
Again, we can give you a much more sort of in-depth overview on the different residency criteria if that's something that you would like to know about. I'm just really conscious that it can be very complex, and I don't like bombarding people with it all alongside all the other information.
But I suppose if anyone needs to know more, they can contact in the first instance their account managers.
Yeah,
and then
definitely.
it can escalate from there if needs be.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So the map I send will have contact numbers and email addresses as well. So yeah, feel free to cascade that.
Thank you. Oh, another question. If you have any residency info sheet?
Not an info sheet as such, as unfortunately I think it'd be more like War and Peace than it would be an A4 sheet. So I am actually in charge of getting all our resources signed off at the moment for 23-24. So I do know that I've got a refugee leaflet and a long residency leaflet, which are currently sat with my policy department. So as soon as they have been signed off and been through the design and editorial to be made all pretty, I'm more than happy to share those. Again, I will pass that map over, and then you take the email address of your account manager and you will be able to contact them, because I will obviously let my team know once everything's been signed off and housed.
Brilliant. Thank you. We will share the slides also with yourselves. So hopefully you've not been making so many notes that you couldn't remember them, but the slides will be shared. Are there any more questions at all from anyone? Any last comments or anything? No, everyone says thank you. It has been really helpful, definitely really helpful. It's really good to always get an update and refresh all those numbers and figures
Yeah, no,
and processes and understand the changes and things like that. So that's really helpful. So thank you so much, Stacey. Sorry, Stacey May.
no,
Much. That's cool. We really do appreciate that. After we will send out the recording from this session, and we'll send that with the links that Stacey sort of passes on to us as well. If in between that anybody's got any other questions or anything like that, you're more than welcome to contact us. But if not, thank you so much all for attending today. Hopefully we'll see you again in our follow-up webinars. The next one is going to be, I believe, I want to say the 24th of April. That's the number that's coming in my mind, and that one is going to be about post-16 pathways, you know, sort of to education, their options and things. So if anybody hasn't got the link for that already, it will be coming out shortly, but hopefully we'll see some of you there as well, which would be great. Stacey, thank you so much. Colleen, Sam, thank you very much for being here, much appreciated. Hopefully we can finish with the recording now, and we will see you all again another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I can confirm it is the 24th. Sorry, I can confirm it is the 24th.
Sorry, Celia. We've got your email address now, so we'll add you onto our email list, and we'll let you know. We'll send you out the flyer and the links just as you've done for this one, so that's no problem. Okay, hope that's clear. Thanks very much, Colleen, for clarification. Love that. All right then, thank you everybody. Have a lovely evening. Take care. Thanks, Stacey.